to the Korean Americans for Political Action webinar entitled Korean Americans Running for Congress, History in the Making. I'm John Lim, Chair of the Board of Directors of KAPA. Today's webinar comes at a truly historical moment. Never before have there been 5 congressional candidates of Korean descent running at the same time, and thankfully not against each other. It's precisely for this time and many more to come that KAPA was created as a nonpartisan nonprofit with a mission to mobilize and converge Americans of Korean descent nationwide to collectively exercise a Korean American political voice that has impact and influence on issues affecting us in our democracy. For this collective effort, we have to find our common ground. This has become an imperative for Korean Americans because in the current political environment of extreme partisan polarization, we will not matter if we cannot come together. By identifying our shared interests and defining our common goals, we can aggregate our voting power and political capital to a point where we can and will become a powerful group in our country. This is what KAPA is all about. So today we're bringing to you this exciting inaugural webinar to present the 5 congressional candidates of Korean descent. By the way, it's not too late to send texts to your relatives and friends to ask them to join us now. So let's start our webinar by introducing our moderator, Juju Chang. Juju is an Emmy Award-winning co-anchor of ABC News to Nightline. She also reports regularly to the Good Morning America and 2020. Juju joined ABC News in 1987 and rose to become a producer for World News Tonight. After a year in Washington, D.C., covering the White House, Capitol Hill, and the presidential election for News One, she co-anchored the overnight show World News Now. Juju has been recognized with numerous awards, including multiple Emmys, Gracie's, DuPont, Merle, and Peabody Awards, as well as the Lifetime Achievement Award at the Front Page Awards in 2017 for her extraordinary career. So Juju, it's a pleasure to see you and pleasure to have you with us today. I'm turning it over to you. Thank you.
John, I want to thank you and everyone who's making this conversation possible. I feel like we're setting all sorts of high watermarks with this webinar. It's the first time that 5 Korean Americans are running for Congress, and the first time we're together, gathered in one Zoom. When I say we, not me, obviously, I am a journalist and I am not running for anything. But it is a time for us to take stock, especially after such a tumultuous year that we've all survived. I hope you've all remained safe and sane out there. But I know that as a journalist, I've been covering so many crises, and one of which is a national reckoning on race and social justice and identity. And I think that this is a time where we're all asking ourselves very big questions about who we are and where we come from and what our role is in civic engagement. And that's why organizations like KAPA are so crucial. It's so important for us to have this dialogue. I will take note that 2 of our panelists are Republicans, 3 are Democrats. I think that reflects the non-monolithic aspect of the Korean American community. And I think that it's really important for us all to sort of share and exchange our thoughts. So I'm going to start by doing a brief intro of each of our panelists, but one at a time, and kick it off with just a simple question, which is, why are you running for Congress? Because of the 5 of you, let's see, 4 are on the West Coast. Andy Kim's the only one on the East Coast. So let me start in the Northwest corner in Washington State with Marilyn Strickland. Marilyn is a Democrat. She's running for Congress in Washington's 10th district. She was born in Seoul, South Korea, and raised in Tacoma. She comes from a military family. If elected to Congress, she'll be the first Korean American woman elected to Congress in its 230-year history, and the first African American to represent Washington State at the federal level. And this is, you know, a time of intersectionality in our world. And like Kamala Harris, you represent both African Americans and Asian Americans. As a former mayor of Tacoma, during her tenure, Marilyn launched the Minority Business Development Agency and helped attract over $1 billion in investment for housing and businesses, and invested $500 million in infrastructure and for the Port of Tacoma. And under her leadership, Tacoma raised graduation rates from 55 to 89%, worked towards increasing the minimum wage, implemented paid sick leave, universal background checks for gun ownership, and as a proud graduate of Tacoma Public Schools, she earned her BA at UW, as they call it, University of Washington, and an MBA from Clark Atlanta University. There is so much to say. I will add, though, that she was also for a while CEO of Seattle Metropolitan Chamber of Commerce. And I think in many ways, she says she's proudest of the work she did to lead Tacoma out of the economic recession when she was mayor from 2010 to 2017. So let's start with you, Marilyn. Why are you running for Congress?
Great. Well, thank you very much for having me here, and thank you to our host today. So when you are asked as a candidate, why are you running for office? It's a simple question, but it's not always easy to answer. So for me, this is about where I come from. My father was an African-American man who served in the military. My mother, Korean woman who grew up in a place that had a lot of challenges, an occupation, a war. So when I think about the why, it's really about where I come from. I'm a descendant of slaves. I'm a daughter of Korea, but I'm an American woman. And there are people who came before me who struggled for dignity, for rights, for opportunity. And I have a duty and a responsibility to move forward and carry on the work that they've done. So that's why I'm running for Congress.
Thank you so much. Let's go to Michelle Park Steele in Southern California. She is a Republican. She's running for California's 48th district. She was elected to the Orange County Board of Supervisors in 2014, and she represents people in the second district, which includes places like Costa Mesa, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, some of the most beautiful places in the world, I would argue. She served as vice chair of the State Board of Equalization, where she represented 8 million people in Southern California. And at the time, on Michelle's website, it says proudly that she was the highest ranking Korean American official in the United States in that role. In 2017, she was unanimously voted to serve as chairwoman for the Orange County Board of Supervisors. In 2018, she was reelected. And she is in a race against an incumbent in the 48th, right? Let's see. And as a young adult, we should note that Steele came to the States with her mother and 2 younger sisters and talks a lot about how her mother's struggle inspired her to run. But let's go to you now, Michelle. Why are you running for Congress?
Thank you, Juju. Last time I saw you was in New York about like 10, maybe more than 10 years ago. So it's nice seeing you. You never really changed. And thank you for Abe, and thank you for John and David, and for inviting me for this. As I was highest when I actually was a State Board of Equalization member. That's the only state, the tax agency you get elected out of 15 states. So in California, and I represented over 9 million constituents. That's why people said, you are the highest Korean American at that time. Now I'm chair of the Orange County Board of Supervisors at this time. And it's just working full time and campaign full time is very, very tough to do. But I'm running because, in Orange County, especially Juju just said that most beautiful beach cities, Seal Beach, Huntington Beach, Newport Beach, and Laguna Beach, and all the beach cities in Orange County, it's really, really pretty ones. Only thing is people are fighting partisan in Washington, D.C., and they're not really bringing to their own residents. I want to do something different. And you know what? I'm going to work for my my constituents, not for partisan work in Washington, D.C. That's why I'm running. And I actually, my life is really good. I ran for 4 different elections, and this, I won all 4. This is 5th one. I'm not going to change the record. So I'm willing to win, and I'm ready to win, and November 3rd, and I'm going to get there. So thank you for inviting me today.
Thank you. Andy, let's go to you. We're going to give a brief intro. You are in a race that was described by the Philadelphia Inquirer as one of the toughest in the country. You became the first Korean American member of Congress since 1992. That's quite a drought. Also the first Korean American Democrat elected to Congress, and the first from the East Coast. We all know that Andy represents Southern New Jersey. He grew up in South Jersey, the proud son of Korean immigrants, attended public schools. That's part of a couple of people's backgrounds. And you credit the quality of your education with helping you become a Rhodes Scholar and a leading national security expert. Worked as a career public servant under both Democrats and Republicans, and served in the Pentagon as well as the State Department, the White House National Security Council, and in Afghanistan as an advisor to General Petraeus and to Allen. So Andy, I know you've just voted. You have a very picturesque backdrop there. Tell us why you're running for re-election.
Yeah, no, first of all, yeah, thank you for having me here. Actually, the votes are a little delayed, so I may have to run quickly and come back, which is why I have to stay close. But first of all, just awesome to see all of us on one screen here. This is pretty extraordinary to just see the level of energy and the leadership that we have across this country. So just like, look, no matter what happens in 34 days, just congrats to everybody for just stepping up and giving it your all. So thank you for doing that. Look, for me, it's all about public service for me. That word service means so much to me and my family. It drives us with every ounce of what we try to do. I served my country my entire career, and I was proud to do it. I started under the Bush administration, very low on the totem pole, worked my way up through the Obama administration, served at the Pentagon, out in Afghanistan, at the White House, everywhere, always as a career public servant, not as a political appointee, and I was proud of that. The oath that we swear and the oath that everybody here, we're hoping that we get to do again, is an oath to the Constitution, and that's something that I hold very sacred. So while my job is obviously a little bit different here than it is in the executive branch I served before, it's still the same job, actually. It's about serving the American people, just from a different branch. So I really believe in that deeply, and I know it's hard to kind of fathom that in a time of just hyper partisanship and kind of back and forth. I hear what Michelle's saying, that I feel it too. We got a lot of gridlock, a lot of problems. There's no doubt about that. But I learned a line when I worked at the State Department, which is that you don't have good government unless you have good people working in government. It is a reflection of who we are as people. It is not just something that happens, So in order to have the kind of government that I want, the kind of country that I want my 3-year-old and my 5-year-old baby boys to grow up in, I decided that I'm not going to let other people fight my fights for me. I'm not going to assume that they will be able to do what it is that I hope that they do. I'm going to just take it on myself. So, I'm doing this because I'm a son of immigrants, married to an immigrant, and a father to 2 baby boys that served my country my whole life. And I'll continue to hopefully do that if I can. Thanks.
I do think that's a common theme. Thank you, Andy. Let's go to Young Kim. All of us, I think, are proud children of Korea. Young Kim is running in the 39th district, also Orange County, San Bernardino County as well. Beautiful cities like Buena Park, Fullerton, Yorba Linda, just to give you guys a sense of where Young's running. She is a Republican, as we know. She's running for the seat that Dana Rohrabacher lost in 2018, and she's running against the incumbent, Gil Cisneros. Young was born in Korea, and she and her family moved to the States in 1975. She worked as a financial analyst for First Interstate Bank, and then as controller for JK Sportswear, and then started her own business in ladies wear. But she began her political career working for former Congressman Ed Royce as community liaison and director of Asian affairs. And so I will ask you the same question, Young. Why are you running for Congress?
Sure. First of all, let me clarify that I am running in California's 39th Congressional District, which is the seat that my former boss, Congressman Ed Royce, held for 26 years before he retired, not the Dana Rohrabacher seat. That's Michelle.
Oh, okay. Sorry about that.
No
Thank you for correcting that.
By that, yes. And also, I think the common theme, I think, Juju, that's what you were trying to say, is that The common theme here is that we're all immigrants and we are parents of 1 or 2, 3, but in my case, 4 children. And you just mentioned that I started in the private sector as a controller, financial analyst, and I went on to become a small business owner. And then I had the opportunity to serve with then state senator initially, and then Congressman Ed Royce. This is a district that I know and have served, and I went on to serve in the California State Assembly as an elected member, becoming the first Korean American Republican woman to serve in California, in our nation's, state's capital. So running for Congress with the retirement of Ed Royce is a natural progression for me to continue to bring the representation that our district and the people in Southern California has come to know. And I've learned so much during my time, both working in Washington and the district. I feel this is my community. This is where I raised my children. They all went to public schools here. This is also where I realized the American dream. So I'm running to ensure that we show by example, lead by example, by not stepping back, but really when we have issues that are important for our community, we need to step up and we need to voice our concerns. And that's what I learned as formerly as a longtime congressional staff, and then later as an elected member. I feel that the void that we feel in our community, letting and connecting with the elected officials to make sure that our community's concerns are met, it's so important. And the way to do that is by getting involved. And as an elected official, we have an opportunity to bring others to work with us, serve in whatever capacity, and we have the ability to bring them on board and grow our political empowerment, which is what KAPA is trying to do. So on that note, I wanted to thank you so much for bringing this, all 5 of us together. This is really historic. And I'm really looking forward to running and winning and serving together. And Andy, if you recall, 2 years ago, we were on the steps of the Capitol when we thought we were still leading and winning, and we even took the freshman class photo together. It's not my doing, but that's the congressional schedule. So that was a very odd feeling at the time, but this time we are committed to winning and joining you on the steps of the Capitol, along with the rest of us in the webinar here, and then just really making history together by having not only one, but few more Korean Americans serving in the United States Congress. Thank you.
And thank you, Young. Last but not least, of course, is David Kim. He's running for Congress in the 34th District, arguably the most delicious Congress, with Koreatown, Little Tokyo, Filipino Town as all parts of his district. I read that you are the son of pastors, that you drove an Uber till 3 a.m. to pay off your student loan debt, that you worked, the first job out of college was the LA County DA's office, and then you worked as an entertainment attorney, and then worked to provide affordable legal care, legal service options to those being taken advantage of. I'm told that you help so many Asian Americans and Korean people navigate the US music industry that you became known as the LA K-pop attorney, which I think is very interesting, and is currently working in immigration law, defending folks in court as they receive notice to appear or fighting for asylum. Obviously, you come from a community organizing background. David, why are you running for Congress?
Thank you for that great intro, Juju, and it's an honor to be with everyone on this panel. I am running for Congress because it's an extension of who I am, as just as many of you shared. My parents immigrated in 1983. They both worked and contributed to society while also serving as pastors. I actually grew up in Tacoma, Washington, Maryland. So I'm very familiar with just everything there. And they worked their butts off. And just to see them pour out their heart and who they were to their community members, and especially our church community members, because for a lot of immigrants, one of their centers of fellowship and of connecting is the church. And so from an early age on, from age 6, 7, I remember calling the phone companies, the gas electric companies, talking in English on behalf of our church kwanzanims and jipsanims, doing all of that. And so it's sort of been an extension of who I am today, with helping different Korean artists navigate the US music industry like Ailey, Amber from FX, and others. But I really feel that what they built up was so amazing, and for us to really build upon that, what they built up as a ceiling is now our floor. And so I'm grateful to people like Young, to Michelle and all of you guys to help make that possible for us. But the reality that we have right now is that the American dream isn't so achievable. I talk with my parents a lot, how if they were to immigrate now, they wouldn't be able to create the life that they did for us up until now, and how that's not possible anymore. In our district, we are one of the poorest congressional districts out of all of America, out of all 435. We're one of the poorest. In Koreatown, our per capita incomes are less than the average rent for one-bedroom apartment. We have financial distress and we need to address it. And so with this urgency and knowing what that life is like, to have the 2 to 3 job hustle, trying to make ends meet, and being in that and realizing this is not the way to go for anyone, especially our own communities. And so that's why I'm taking the call to run for office in our district, because it's something that we need to ensure that every American has a floor to stand on. And so that's why I'm running for our office.
Thank you, David. The other theme that runs through all 5 of you is that you're all eloquent and able to tell really great stories about who you are and where you come from. Andy, I'm a little terrified that we're going to lose you to a vote. So let me ask you a question. I think all 5 of you represent the Korean American communities, the diaspora, if you will, the biracial folks, the Christian community folks, the first generation folks, although the majority of Koreans in the United States are still first generation. Andy, you represent a district where there are not many Koreans. Would it benefit you, do you think, to identify strongly as Korean American? And how does that label fit into this idea of this new Korean identity that's being forged in this generation?
Yeah, happy to answer this. So first of all, I do identify strongly as a Korean American because it's who I am. And I think for me, what was important in this district, as you said, this is a district that's 85% white, less than 1% Korean American, less than 3% Asian American. And I'll be honest, there were a number of people that told me that I was wasting my time running in this district. They told me that there's just no way that there's 0 Koreans in Congress, no way that the next Korean American is going to come from a district like this. But look, I think what we need to do is just, continue to remind ourselves that we can't let other people define what we are or are not capable of accomplishing. That we are done with people kind of setting the ceiling and the limits of what me and other Korean Americans are capable, whether it's in politics or business or entertainment or the arts or others. We just need to make sure that we define what we can do based off of our own talents and our capabilities. I also think it's just really important message to send that Korean American candidates and Asian American candidates and candidates of color can't just only win in communities and congressional districts that are dominated by a particular demographic or a minority group. Korean American candidates can and should be able to win anywhere in this country. And what was important for me is to be able to show that my Korean American story, and I told the story about my dad and my mom and their struggles and their coming to the United States and what it's like for me to grow up here as Korean American. I told that story, but what was important is to show that that's not just a Korean American story. That's not just an Asian American story. It is fundamentally an American story. And when we make that connection and weave that thread, it shows how we get more empowered when we connect in with each other. And it's so important for us to have groups and networks like this to grow our strength. But we also need to make sure that we don't isolate ourselves, that we work to be able to weave that in and connect in with the broader tapestry, if you don't mind me using that kind of metaphor. So, that was something that I really came to understand and learn as I'm knocking doors and making phone calls and asking for people's vote in this district. And it makes me very proud that this 85% white district with less than 1% Korean American population elected the very first Korean American in 20 years and the very first Korean American Democrat in the history of this country.
Thank you for that. Marilyn, let me go to you. There's this question of whether we should be Americans of Korean descent or Korean Americans, and how do we label ourselves moving forward? What does it mean to you to be asked about your Koreanness when people learn that you have an African-American father and a Korean mother? I ask as a mother of biracial children myself.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and I tell people that being half Black and half Korean means that people have been trying to label me my entire life. And even in the context of politics, well, are you a progressive Democrat? Are you a moderate Democrat? And so the labeling thing has just been part of my life for as long as I can remember. With that said, I think there's something interesting about my situation. So a lot of time when we talk about being biracial, that comes in many different flavors, for lack of a better term. There are people who are half white and half Korean. There are people like me who are half Black and Korean. And the combinations are very different. And I point that out because your identity sometimes is driven by how people see you. How did they identify you? And then you have the chance to explain. And I say with complete affection that if you were raised by a Korean woman, you are Korean. That's just a fact. And, and with that said, though, there's also the way that the world identifies you. So depending on how I wear my hair, some people will see me and think I am strictly African American. It depends on what time of the year it is. We've had COVID this year. I have not been outside very much. And so depending on who I'm around and how they view me, some people, especially in the Pacific Northwest, because there are a lot of people up here who are biracial for a few reasons. We have a very large military population. So a lot of people have been deployed in different parts of the world, got married, had kids, and returned here. But the example I use is that when I lived in Atlanta for 5 years, a lot of people I met did not know that I was half Asian or half Korean. But here in the Pacific Northwest, people will see me and they'll say, oh, what is your race? What are you mixed with? So as far as identity, I would say that, growing up, I have always been Black and Korean. I've always identified with both. But I will tell you that as I've gotten older, as I have spent more time appreciating my mother's story and her background, I feel as though my Korean identity has just strengthened. And I say this because when we talk about the story of the United States, we hear about these big seismic events that we've been involved in, wars, the history, but there's a reason they call the Korean War the Forgotten War. At the same time, we have a military presence that has been there forever, and there's never been a formal declaration to end the war. So as I think about what it means to be Korean, people will often say to you, bless their hearts, oh, you're Korean? Do you eat kimchi? That is like the default thing they think about, as opposed to understanding that there is so much richness to our culture. And what often happens to people too is that when they think about culture, it is typically food, traditional clothing, and language. And those things are very important. But I will tell you that I am of an age where growing up in America, there was pressure to, quote, assimilate. And of course, when we say assimilate into what? What is considered mainstream culture. So a lot of my friends who are my age, who are biracial and half Asian, or have a parent who doesn't speak English as the first language, we don't know the mother tongue. So I do not speak fluent Korean. I have cousins who are next generation who speak fluent Korean. And that is a reflection of how culture and ethnicity have evolved in America as far as people wanting to embrace what they believe is not called mainstream culture. But as I think about my identity, I said earlier, I am a daughter of Korea. I'm an American woman. I am a proud Black woman, and I'm a proud Korean woman. And for me, those are all attributes and strengths that I bring from each of my respective cultures. And so as we think about 2020, 2021, and moving forward, and my opportunity to represent in Congress, I will be a member of the AAPI caucus. I will be a member of the Congressional Black Caucus, but I'm also a member of the New Democrats. And so it's an opportunity for me to form relationships, to be proud of my identity, and to represent the people that who are going to send me to Congress. Like Congressman Kim, my district is not majority minority. And so it's about 75% white, 25% minority, with even divisions between African American, Latino, and AAPI. With that said, though, because of the historic nature of this, people up and down the I-5 corridor in Washington State who are Korean American are enthusiastic about my candidacy. People who are African American in and out of the district are enthusiastic. And with a lot of you, you're probably getting national attention as well. And so as we think about making history in our own way, we know that it's about the people we're going to represent in our district, but it's also bigger than that. And it provides a chance for us, if we are all elected, to think about an agenda to build power with Korean Americans and how we have a shared agenda regardless of where we fall in the political spectrum. And that's what's exciting about this today.
Marilyn, thank you. It reminds me of a lunch I had with a foreign ministry official from Korea, and he referred to the efforts to export culture from Korea. He called it kimchi diplomacy. The idea that Korean food is such a great door opener for folks. Young, let me go to you. You and Michelle are both bilingual. Speaking of Marilyn's, confession that she doesn't speak the mother tongue, neither do I particularly well. I get scolded by many a taxi cab driver in school. Your districts, Michelle and Young, both have significant Korean populations, but clearly not enough to guarantee a victory. Young, how do you balance your approach to capture the voters, but not alienate others, to work towards getting, the coalition, a winning coalition?
Okay, sure. It is true. I'm blessed to be bilingual and bicultural in a very incredibly diverse district that I'm running in. California's 39th district is like 1/3 Caucasian, 1/3 Hispanic, and 1/3 Asian. But the Korean American voters are the second largest voting bloc among the registered Asian Americans, with about 18,000 voters. And we have the projection of voter turnout in our district to be about 260,000 or more. That is very equivalent to what we witnessed in 2016 cycle. That means I will need to earn at least 130,000 votes or more to win in November. This race, as you know, is one of the closest and is a major toss-up. Therefore, the significance of the Korean American voting bloc cannot be overlooked. And I certainly do not take their votes for granted, because they could tip me over the top. Having said that, in order to win the majority of the voters, I'm talking about issues that affect all of us and matter to the people of the district and in California and across the country. With this crisis, COVID-19 has upended everyone's lives. So I talk to the voters about breaking the partisan gridlock to fight COVID-19 and the need to pass a bipartisan relief bill. We need to extend PPP and stimulus checks for families, and we need to provide funding for schools and local governments, funding for increased testing for COVID and vaccine distribution, so on and so forth. But I also talk about working on getting the economy back on track with pro-business and pro-growth policies. And I also talk about fighting for affordable quality healthcare, improving access. Hold on one second, my phone is ringing. So I talk about fighting for affordable quality healthcare. We need to talk about how we're going to work on reducing prescription drug costs, protecting those with pre-existing conditions. We need to end surprise billing. We need to ensure the price transparency. These are important issues that it's on everybody's mind these days. But I do talk about American Dream, as all of you are doing, because as an immigrant wife, and like I said, mother of 4, very proud of them. And I talk about educational opportunities. I talk about economic opportunities, because these were made available to immigrants like us. And I talk about how this country has provided the opportunity to realize the American dream. These are all issues that are critical to not just Koreans or conservatives, but these are all people in my district, and all Americans. They care about the same issues, because our values are American values.
So well put, Young. Clearly you have universal themes. David, let me go to you, because this part of the conversation is about managing between generations, first generation, second generation Korean Americans. You, as a second generation Korean American, are in a district with a lot of first generation Koreans. How do you bridge that philosophical bent when so many first generation Korean Americans tend to be slightly more conservative? You have a very progressive agenda. Do you ever fear that it may be too progressive? How do you bridge that gap?
Yeah, I think it's all about, first of all, framing the conversation instead of being attached to labels, but really going to the core of what each person or group wants to address. And I don't think there's anything progressive about putting your community first, putting your people first, putting your family first. And so even how I view it right now is just as a normal conversation that I would have with my parents. Yes, there are differences in views with that, but it's with with any parent, the Korean parent that has immigrated, that has worked their way up, fulfilling the American dream, paving the road for us to go ahead and do what we want, none of them would want us to be blocked from gaining access to opportunities. None of them would want us to experience and suffer when they actually immigrated here for us to have better lives. And so I think when we bring the plane down and level it down to something that's more personal within the family, how does it affect us? I remember the conversations that I had with my parents working as a free attorney because paid jobs were a scarcity during a certain part of my career, and then driving for Lyft and Uber saying, "엄마, 나 너무 피곤해." And like, when you personalize things, nothing really becomes labels or anything. It really becomes down to the family unit of what parent would want their children to suffer. And I think what we can all agree on, that it's important for everyone to have equal access and opportunity, because something that we can't ignore is that as Asian Americans, although we're all American, as Asian Americans, we still don't have equal footing in regards to other areas, whether that be in education, workforce, or etc. And so our parents want us to have as many opportunities as possible. And so that's why it's not a surprise that you see 1.5 and second generation Korean Americans, Asian Americans being a bit more progressive, because something's at stake here. Our parents fought to let us have the lives that we have right now, and we're not going to let that go to waste. And so we're going to continue on that legacy and build upon that, what they've laid out for us. And so I think it's really reframing the conversation, recognizing that all of us just want to create opportunities for all of us to succeed. And for us, we think that's providing every American a floor to stand on and to have that, because whether it be our community or the many other Asian American or other immigrant communities here in our district, we're all experiencing this financial depression, this distress, this suffering, these missed opportunities. And now I'm so ecstatic and happy to see people like Young and Marilyn and everyone on here to be fighting for that. And so I think that's the common thing that we can continue to progress and discuss about.
Thank you, David. Let's ask Michelle those same questions, actually both questions, which is, how do you bridge that gap between the Korean Americans in your district and the non-Korean Americans, and the first generations and the second generation Korean Americans? It's a lot to be bridging.
Well, actually, I was born in Korea and I was raised in Japan. So Korean's my first language and Japanese my second. Korean American thing is really, really big, because when I go out, then, always talking about American dreams, and then, reach out to those constituents, because in my district, actually 14.9% Asian Americans, and we have just a little bit of Hispanics, and then Blacks, and mostly white. So it's, going out to, what Young said, that, we go out, with issues that, what's most important. I think Andy Kim and Young, we totally understand, because of Trump's tax policy that really cut down local, state, and local taxes. So it really tried to penalize the state itself, but it ended up actually penalizing residents themselves. So that's why that, we reach out to the issues. But you know what? Values are always same. For me, I go out and I always just like open heart and you being honest and reach out to these people. They all know that, I've been elected since 2006, but you know what? I don't know everything. Maybe I know California tax system since I was working for California tax agency for 8 years. But other than that, you just being honest and you try to reach out to these people. And David is totally right that framing conversation, it depends on how you're doing it. Because my current supervisor district, we have 85% white. So you know what? It depends on that, how you reach out to and how you frame your conversation, how you talk to these people, and then you know what? You don't have any problem to win. That's the way I think. And then, especially you go out, and I always start that I speak Korean as my first and Japanese as my second, and English is my third. Usually people say, wow. And they reach out to me more than actually reach out to, I have to reach out to those people. So, you know what? I'm having so much fun. This is a very exciting election. And this is, like a Maryland, Young and I actually raised kids together. So my two kids are same age as Young's first two kids. They were like, what was it? Bridesmaids. Each each other, and they're very close. And I've known actually my mother and Young's father-in-law taught at the same high school. So you know what, we go to generations. So I'm so excited, and I see David Kim totally different, you know, reason that you know why he's running, and Andy, I am just so excited. 5 Korean Americans are running for Congress. This never happened before in history, and we all gonna win.
And there are a lot of Korean Americans. Well, Michelle, you just reinforced this secret idea that I had as a child, that all Korean Americans know each other. So evidently that's true. But it's not just for Congress, right? There are a record number of state races this year with candidates of Korean descent. I just want to point out Missouri, Georgia, Texas, California, Washington, and Iowa. I want to be mindful of the time. We have less than 20 minutes left, and I want to get through this question of what you will do in Congress to foster and support U.S.-Korea relations. But before we get to that, I want to do a lightning round of 2 quick questions, which maybe, hopefully, you can answer with 1 sentence each. The first one is, name a Korean American not in your family that has made the most notable contribution to the U.S. and to whom you look for inspiration. And the second quick rapid fire, again, 1 sentence each, is this is one of the founding principles of KAPA, is to help bring a Korean American to the White House. So predict the year that that might happen. So let's see, who do we start with? Who do I pick on? Young, let me start with you.
Sure. Okay. The first question, I would choose K.W. Lee. He has a colorful way of expressing his views, using some strong words, you know, oftentimes passionately talking about Han, and calls people like that he likes. I mean, if he likes you, he will call you a young punk. But that's what makes K.W. Lee so effective. And Juju, you know him so well. We all know him. So he surely gets his attention and points across that way. So that's somebody that I look forward to. I had the pleasure of recognizing him on the California State Capitol when I was in the State Assembly during the API Heritage Month. Okay, for the second question, predicting when Korean American will be in the White House. Oh gosh, hopefully in my lifetime.
Good answer. I love that. Andy, you're up next.
Yeah, you know, I'm trying to think of, like, when it comes to somebody who's had an impact on this country, you know, I just think about it in terms of my life. You know, there was a very influential person named Harold Koh that had a really big impact on my life. As someone who joined up at the State Department, I was a career guy, and honestly, there were not a lot of people that looked like me there at State Department. To have Harold there at the upper echelons really made me feel like I could be there and I could do this type of work. In terms of Korean American in the White House, I don't know. I'll just kind of throw out there maybe, I don't know, 20, 30 years. I think we could happen sometime in our lifetime. So hopefully we'll see it.
Excellent. Harold Koh's an excellent choice. David, you're next.
Yes, thank you. Mine would be my role model, Dr. Young-woo Kang Young-woo 박사님. He passed away about 8 years ago, but he served as a policy advisor to the National Council on Disability under President George Bush, and then also the vice chair of World Council of Disability. He's succeeded by his sons, one of which served as deputy counsel to President Obama. But for him, I watched a film called The Light in My Heart. He was blind. He lost everything, his family, when he became blind, yet he immigrated. He paved the way for so many Korean Americans and communities, and he was able to do that. And I remember my dad introducing me to him when I was in 8th grade, and I got to shake his hand, hug him, and like he inspired me and so many Korean American youths. And yeah, and so I attribute that to him. That was a long sentence. In terms of
English professors would be long run-on sentence, David.
Long run-on, yes. Korean in White House, I would say, I mean, I'll say 20, 30 years as well.
Okay, Michelle, you're up next.
You know what? There's so many people that I respect, like, you know, Mike Hong, Kiwan Ha, Don Lee, Brian Kim. But you know what? I respect all the first generation, most of first generation Korean Americans begin with. But the most, I just love the most, and I was very close friend who just passed away last June. He Lee, that who started BCD Tofu House, and she's the one that it's amazing that she is so soft outside, smiling, kind. You can see that, but inside of her, that she raised 3 sons very well. She was very strong. She actually brought out Hallyu Korean food in the United States, maybe all over the world, because she has few stores in, Europe. So you know what? I miss her so much, and someday people's gonna say Michelle was like his. I hope to hear that she's my hero. And for the White House, you know what? This year we have 5 congressional candidates, Korean American candidates here. I think soon it's going to be happening. I don't know when that soon is coming, but you know what? This is so exciting here. Maybe within 10, 20 years, maybe like what Andy Kim said, hopefully in my lifetime.
I read her obituary in the New York Times, and it talked about the long lines out in front of BCB Tofu House. What a life well lived. Marilyn, you're gonna bring it home.
So the person who's had an impact on me and here in Seattle area in Washington State, her name is Martha Cho. And she's a Korean American woman who was the first Seattle City Council member who was Korean American. She was a special advisor to Governor Gary Locke, who was the first Chinese American governor to serve, I think, on the continental US. And she was a senior advisor to him. And she was the CEO of the Gates Foundation, which has a global reach. And Martha has been a friend, a mentor, and advisor, and she's just had this profound impact on both the state of Washington and the world. As far as seeing a Korean American president, I'm going to tell you a little funny story. I met Andy Kim this spring when he was here fundraising in Federal Way with the Korean American community. And when I heard him speak and I heard his story, I said to myself, Andy Kim's going to be president one day.
Andy, I don't think you're supposed to shake your head when somebody says that about you. That's not.
I knew that she was going to try to embarrass me some way on this Zoom call, but I wasn't sure how. So I'm in the Maryland I'm the president of the Maryland Strickland fan club. So my money's on her. So.
There are a lot of fan clubs sprouting up today on this webinar, and I would be, happy to help propagate all of them. Frankly, I would like to think that one of the 5 of you would be in the White House someday. So let me finish up. We have, again, just less than 10 minutes to talk about this last question for each of you, which is, what would you do to foster Korean-American relations, Korea-U.S. relations, but also perhaps Korean-American identity in Congress? And we'll go backwards. Again, I'm terrified of losing Andy, so let's start with you.
Yeah, happy to. So, I think what was important here is twofold. One is to make sure that when we're talking about U.S.-South Korea relations, that we think about it in terms of that broader context of the importance of that strategic alliance. I think one of the things that I've been frustrated with when it comes to how we discuss in the Armed Services Committee sometimes is it's often talked about in terms of like what we're doing for South Korea's defense and what we're giving them, without necessarily thinking about just sort of that broader context. When we are a country that says that, we are concerned about what our next relationship will be like with China, or when we're concerned about North Korea, our relationship to South Korea is at the front lines of those big, massive existential questions that we are facing as a nation. So I don't want it to be seen as this transactional relationship. It is something that is a cornerstone of what needs to be in our Indo-Pacific strategy. So I want to see it in that way. The other aspect of it is when we talk about, when we are engaged in issues like the North Korea peace talks and major issues related to the Korean Peninsula, I really want to make sure that Korean American leaders around this country, not just political leaders, but advocates and thinkers and activists are part of that. I really see how both under Trump and Obama, that when relations with other countries are brought into the forefront, oftentimes the diaspora or the community here in the U.S. is consulted, brought into the White House, brought into the Capitol to discuss these issues, what it means to them. I didn't see that much happen when it came to, you know, the North Korea talks or even issues during the Obama administration. So we got to make sure that we make it clear that they need to talk to us. They need to get our opinions on these issues as well.
This is good note-taking for my conversation tomorrow with the Council on Foreign Relations and Foreign Policy in the elections. Michelle, let me go to you next. Same question.
You know what, sometimes that, you know, Korea forgets that, you know, U.S., the soldiers, that 33,686 Americans sacrificed for Korea. And now that Korea is not third world country. So you know what, we have to have its alliance of democracies between those countries, but they have to be very transparent. They have to have open dialogue. And then, you know what, important step for next one is that, you know, that mutual beneficial relationship that, you know, both sides has to really get into and then talk about it. That's another reason that, you know, I'm running, I speak both languages. I've been working since 2006, got elected. And you know what, actually, I was one actually working with the Korean American communities and brought them up for business-wise. But right now, that, you know, what we can do is I can be the bridge, and any of you there that you understand Korean culture, you understand Korean tradition, you understand how Korean government is doing right now, and you understand how U.S. government is doing. We can be a great bridge, actually, where we can represent U.S. at the same time you can represent, you know, Korea. So 5 of us that, you know, we are running all because of different reasons. But you know what, reasons, but you know what, this is very, very important. We can be great asset out there that we can be the bridge between those 2 countries.
Marilyn, I was thinking of you going to the Congressional Black Caucus and the AAPI caucus. You're going to be very busy, but maybe you could start the Korean caucus as well, the 5 of you. Your answer to the same question.
No, this is a really, really good point. And, you know, Andy's been there in Congress by himself, and he needs backup. So that's why we need to get there to make sure that we have our own caucus. With that said, you know, I spoke earlier about the forgotten war and how there's just a lack of education and understanding about the story of the peninsula. And that goes from the Joseon dynasty to where we are today. So I believe that, you know, those of us who have the opportunity to get to Congress or not, we have to do a better job of telling the story of the motherland. And when I think about going to Congress and talking about advocacy, whether it is for an official declaration to end the Korean War, and then what does that mean? When I think about our presence there, which is geopolitical and national security for the entire region, when I think about denuclearization, these are things that are important, but we have to bring our colleagues along who are not Korean to help them understand. And as someone who will belong to many caucuses, but especially what you said, the Congressional Black Caucus and the AAPI caucus, and hopefully we'll start a Korean American caucus, we have an opportunity to have allies and to tell the story and help more people understand, so there is traction that can be gained to really help us understand what it is we want there. I don't think any of us think that going over to Korea and having something happen immediately is realistic, but there's a way that we can tell the story and get more of our colleagues to understand what's at stake and how it's good for us here at home as much as it is good for what happened on the peninsula.
Okay, Young, I'm going to go to you and just remind you we have less than 4 minutes, and David still has to go.
Oh, okay, thank you for that soft pressure to keep it short. But, you know, as you all know, fortunately, I've worked with former chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee, Chairman Ed Royce, for over 2 decades. So the people and the voters of the district are very familiar with the work that I've done alongside Ed Royce on the issues that define U.S., Asia, and specifically the U.S.-Korea relations. Many of you may or may not know, I served as an interlocutor for the U.S. Republic of Korea Interparliamentary Exchange for about 14 years while serving with Chairman Ed Royce. And under his leadership, I facilitated the legislative exchanges and meetings between the members of the U.S. Congress and the National Assembly of the Republic of Korea. And I had the privilege of working on key issues like congressional ratification of Korea's FTA, the passage of the North Korea Human Rights and Refugees Act in 2004 that was reauthorized in 2008 and 2012. And then, of course, the congressional hearing on comfort women that led to the passage of the House Resolution 121. And then I think, Andy, you may appreciate this. In 2008, there was the Korea Defense Cooperation Improvement Act, and I'm very glad to have worked on that. And, but important thing is working on all of these issues require listening to the voices of the Koreans and the Korean Americans and reflect them in the congressional process, which is why I helped to create APCAC, which is the Asian Pacific Congressional Advisory Council in 1994. And we've held topical forums, invited the Asian community, definitely including the Korean Americans, to serve as advisors. And we had roundtable discussions with the members of Congress on a regular basis. And these issues and the input we received from APCAC were reflected in the legislation or in the policy statements that I just mentioned. So I am going to do two things when I go to Congress and bring the community and build and foster the U.S.-Korea relations is to revive that advisory council when I'm elected. And hopefully we can invite some of you on this call to be able to serve as my advisors. And then secondly, I'm going to reestablish the U.S. Republic of Korea Interparliamentary Exchange and encourage members of Congress to join in the interparliamentary discussion with our counterparts in the National Assembly and talk about issues of mutual concern that ranges from trade to human rights to security concerns and more. And I think I got 2 minutes left for David. So let me just talk 30 seconds. That's important. I'm going to make a note that because I worked so hard at creating a partnership between the two countries, that I did not support the current policy of aggressively demanding that Korea pay so much more for the U.S. troops' presence in South Korea, because that is not the way to treat our partners. And any financial benefit to U.S. isn't worth the long-term damage to our relationship. I think Americans understand that the troops that we have in South Korea are not just only for the South Korea's sake. They serve both nations' interests in keeping stability in the region. So I will work to build mutually respectful, mutually beneficial policies and diplomacy, because that's what I've done for decades now.
Young, thank you. David, you have about a minute or so because I have to give a quick goodbye.
Yeah, no, thank you so much. I'll make it very quick. I won't repeat anything, but I believe that what we can all agree to is that U.S.-Korea relations and our Korean Peninsula can't be left to the whim of any administration on a tactical, strategic level that's just purely just that. It needs to be something that's more deeply rooted into the history of what's been not addressed for decades, which includes, like what Marilyn pointed out, ending the Korean War, which my opponent has never commented on, despite being asked to by the Korean community here over and over again. Another reason why I'm also running. But what's important for us is to solidify this in the long term, where we're focusing on Korea on a relational level instead of it purely being left to the whims of each administration. So it's very important for us and for our Korean community members to be heard. And so I would definitely love to see a task force committee of all of us on there even addressing this, because it's something that's so personal to all of us. When I talked with my dad and mom, they cry because of the fact of thinking about Korea and the possible reunification that we could be working towards. And so it's something that's so central to all of us.
Thank you for all of David Kim and all the members of KAPA. My internet connection apparently is unstable. I just was thanking everyone, including John Lim, chair of the board of KAPA, and the advisory members, in particular, Suki Kang and Andy Kim, the general counsel. Thanks, of course, to all of our panelists, to GIMA Group for their design, and for the Council of Korean Americans for their technical assistance and their inspiration. This webinar was made possible by generous support from HMart, one of my favorite places on the planet, Scott Young, Paul Lee, David K. Kim, and the members of KAPA. They say that in K-pop there's a Korean wave, a Hallyu, and I think that 2020 is a Hallyu for Korean politics. So as the themes of being children of immigrants and perhaps a bipartisan initiative started on this call, thank you all for your service. Thank you for being part of the community, and thank you all in the webinar for joining today.